Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today I want to tell you all about melody-driven beats. So here I have a beat that is extraordinarily melody-driven by this melody right here. So I'm gonna show you the melody as it plays through. And I'll just go ahead and play it for you first, and then we'll talk about it. There are a couple parts that are a little funky, but I wrote it as background music, and what I did was I played it and then I touched it up some. Some parts could still use a little bit of touching up, but it's mostly there. So let me go ahead and play it for you. Yeah, so that's a pretty cool beat. You could tell that the melody is just what carries you through the whole thing. It's what creates interest. There are a couple spots that are a little funny that I should move a couple notes around, and you'll notice that things are pretty off the grid. Not very often do notes actually land. Like this is off, this is off. Everything is pretty much off, except for a few notes that I deliberately moved. And what I did was I played in, so I wrote this like line here, right? And the goal was, okay, so I have a cool repetitive line. I wanted this line to be a little ambiguous about my chords, just outline the key I'm in. That way I have a little more freedom when it comes to picking notes that I want to play around with in my solo. So that's why I wrote the line that I did. And so these are the notes. I don't do anything more creative with this. If I wanted to get, I could get a lot more crazy. Maybe if I wanted to develop it further, I could add in new notes, maybe introduce a chord progression. But as you can see, it's very, very melodic driven. So this is the pattern I settled on. So it's just a nice little thing. And so then you have the melody come in. And here we have a lot of ideas happening at the same time. So, in the melody. So what we have first is we have an introduction statement introducing us to the idea that we're going for. And so we see that we are in the key of A minor. And so we have a little run up to A through the A minor chord. And then it moves around in that scale. So it's jumping around. And we have our first phrase. And our first phrase sounds like this. And I find it easier when I'm playing stuff like this to play it in. Sequencing it in, I can sequence stuff like this in, but it takes a lot longer, and it's tough to get all these little nuances here that are just like slightly off, and the notes are just the right length. That's just tough to do. But you see, we are introduced, and we have a very nice phrase. We have an ascent. We have a clear focal point with our highest note, and it's even accented. You see, it's one of the louder notes in the notes surrounding it. So it's just a really nice introduction statement. It is also the same sound that I used for this thing. So for this accordion, they're the same accordion. And if you're wondering what accordion this is also in the Contact Factory library. You have to go into the world section and they'll have an accordion. They actually have a couple different accordions. I liked just the one they called accordion the most. And so we have an introduction statement, and I've got to get musically to a point where I can bring in this beat. And I want it to be freaking smooth, right? I want the music to carry in the new part. I don't want to have some sort of an effects transition, some sort of a sweep and a hit. I just want it to be like, bam, there it is. Like, it makes sense that it's there. So I went ahead, and what I did was, while I'm improvising, I'm thinking of a lot of things. One of them is I'm worrying about the key I'm in and the chords that go with that key. I'm trying to reconcile these things as I'm moving along. But most people are very comfortable in A minor. So I knew that I wanted to do some sort of a scale rundown. So you see, I'm beginning my descent and I find a pattern that I really like as I go down. And I really like the offness of it, sort of. To me, it's a cool feeling. Some parts are a little too off, but you get the idea. It's a very loose sort of thing. So we're coming down and we reach this. We reach a natural resolution, which is just a perfect moment to introduce something new, right? We're going from G sharp to A. And I had an instructor say, and I totally believe it, there's few things that are more beautiful than a half step resolution upwards. It's just a nice thing. So if we take it from here. And then we have our new phrase. But at this point in the solo, musically, I have set myself up to introduce these drums. And for added impact, I might even like leave this out or do something different here. I didn't in this particular case, but if you want to sit down and refine your stuff so it's like more sophisticated, it has a lot more nuance, then you could do that. I was kind of writing this thing as just a fun, quick project, so I wasn't sitting down and looking for every opportunity to do something creative. So we had got here, and then you might be wondering, what the heck? There's like one random flute stab here, and that's like it. And it sounds like it fits. At least I think it's like perfect. And you might be going, how did you know that that is what you wanted to do? And the answer is, I just heard it in my head and I was like, oh, that would be perfect. And I didn't want to take it any further. I was like, that's it. So, because it lined up with the melody, it's at the end of the phrase. And so it was just a perfect moment. So, see, that's nice. So, okay. And you might be going, okay, so we see here that I am now repeating a theme. We have our introduction over here, and I take the same phrase after I have this like little interlude. I have the same phrase, only it's spiced up a bit. It's got a couple extra notes and a few different rhythms. And one of the things that's really nice when you're not writing out notes is it's really easy when you're on the keys to just naturally create variation. Like, so easy. It's a lot harder to come up with some of this stuff just sitting there. One thing that I find works really well is if you have a beat or something jiving, you can sing it out loud and then write that down. That usually works really well. And you're basically just improvising with your voice. But you got to get some sort of an idea from somewhere. So I really liked where this was going. And then I bring in a completely new idea and I use it to... It's just a natural flow, because we see here that we have our first phrase and then we have a little rest that gives a musical breath to it. And then we have my interlude that bleeds into the next phrase and also serves as the introduction to the drums. And then we have another breath. And we have a similar looking thing right here, right? We have a similar looking ascent line. So we get the feeling that it's going to be something like our first phrase. We've developed our phrase now. They're sort of expecting something that ascends, but this one ascends in a very different fashion, but uses the same notes. And so as we go through here, and that's a note that's sort of off, but it's okay. And now you see here those notes. You might be going, how did you know you wanted those notes? And I just knew. It wasn't a case where I was thinking of all this theory. I was like, oh, I like that feeling there and like that. And the fact that I used a rhythm like this for my backbeat is what gives me the flexibility with some of these things. If I was using straight up chords, it would not be near as nice to me. So I'm looking for a spot now to add in the bass. And originally I was like, oh, I'll add it in over here, but it just wasn't working. So I came in and added it in over here. I messed with a lot of different lines. But again, this is very melodic driven. Like you're listening and jamming out to the melody. It's not about incredible bass or incredible mixing or incredible anything else. It's about just feeling the vibe of the melody, what that's trying to tell you. And so that I didn't want the bass to get in the way. And so I used to have a whole bunch of notes, but I just ended up reducing it to mostly A and E. So the root in the fifth. And that worked out quite nicely. Now I knew that I wanted to come to an end and I needed some sort of breath with a timbre because this is really nice and all, but I wanted something else. So as we introduced the sub bass, I'm looking for an opportunity to bring in the piano because I was like, a piano would really jive with this. And this is what I ended up settling on. So see, that's just nice to me. And I set it up with the solo. The phrasing I use a half step down and then a jump to the tonic, which I think is pretty nice. And we can also point out here that the beginning has our phrase and then a little interlude in another phrase. And over here we've got like two chunks, and this chunk is reminiscent of these two sections here, right? While this middle chunk is similar in function to what this does. So it sort of makes sense structurally what's going on. That's another reason why this can be so acceptable. And I'm not going to crazy notes. There are a couple notes in there that are kind of unusual, but I like them for their color. I introduced the piano. So I wrote out this piano line, and this one I did sequence in. So I moved the notes around, adjusted some stuff. I used the strum tool to write out this line. So if you write down some notes and hit Alt-S, it'll bring up the strum tool, and you can make some nice chords because I knew I wanted the effect of a person rolling their hands across the keys, and I knew I would get what I wanted a bit faster if I just sequenced it out. So I sequenced it out and came up with some cool chords that really jived with the mood and feel. And originally I had it over here, and this was just clunky as a structural element. It was not playing nice with the melody. It wasn't smooth. This phrase, so there are rules. There are a couple rules when you have a strong melody, is if you have a lot of elements playing this melody and giving it a lot of power, the more focal point you have on your melody, that gives it additional power with the notes you're using. So if you were to write a really powerful melody and then give a lot of instruments to that melody, not necessarily always like that, but you know what I mean. You have something that's just a really strong element, that'll let it so that when you bring it to the climax, the maximum, like, things are colliding. There's a lot of contrast. That's the word I'm looking for. You have a lot of contrast, and it's clear that there's tension in your music, and you're about to resolve. The amount of power you can get in that resolution is equivalent to the change you can produce in your song. So if I had a much more powerful melody here, something that really just had a lot of tension, then I would get away with adding a sub bass and with adding a piano. But in this sort of a style, it makes no sense. I could not get away with that. So what I ended up doing was I took the line, actually took the last two notes and let it serve as the pickup notes into the measure, and it ended up sounding super nice and a way more smooth, and it came in on an exit, which was just beautiful. So I was like, this is great. This is what I want. And then I just ended it. So it sounds kind of like a sudden ending sort of, but I liked the way it ended. And I didn't want to write anything super long. This was mostly the result of me hearing something cool on Pandora. And I was like, man, I want to make something like that. That's got a cool vibe to it. So that's just some of the explanation of what was going on, why I was making this song. So some of you might be wondering, how else did I come up with this melody? Like, I sat down and improvised with it. Like, what the heck? Improvisation's a tough thing to explain to someone who doesn't play an instrument and improvises on that instrument. Knowing how to play the instrument is not enough. You have to know the theory and have experience with improvising. So that's just like another topic for another day. But basically, I jammed out, came up with something cool that I thought was sort of a neat thing to do. And then what I do is I come in here and I look for notes that sound particularly wrong and nudge them around. There's a couple that I just didn't mess with enough. For example, that weird wonky one over here-ish, somewhere over here. They use da-da, da-da, and they also have some weird velocity markings because my keyboard is not super sensitive. So sometimes I'll hit a key a little bit harder, but it'll jump up to a much higher level, a level that I don't want. I'm actually able to adjust how my keys respond when I hit them, but it's still not the most finely tuned. Like it's not this is $100 MIDI keyboard. It's not like some crazy expensive, way more accurate keyboard. So I just know that that's something I'm going to live with. And so I'll come in here and fix weird velocities that give accents where I don't want accents, drag out notes, things like that. Sometimes I will quantize my stuff, but with this sort of I feel like quantizing it would be a detrimental thing. It just would not work. So it's better to just go in and work note by note, putting it in. I mean, the other thing is I could sequence it in, and this is far faster in this regard. Sometimes it's a lot slower to try and do it because if it's out of my range of playability. So anyways, those are just some thoughts. Hopefully you see a little bit of melodic usefulness in your beats. Coming up with just something cool that ebbs and flows can add a lot of interest. It acts as a vocal for your beat but it's an instrumental. So that's really cool. This is really great. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.